The knock. There are moments in a life that divide everything into before and after. Most of them announce themselves: a diagnosis, a loss, a departure. You know in the moment of their arrival that you are standing at a boundary, that the person on the other side of it will not be quite the same as the person on this side. You have time, however brief, to brace. And then there are the other kind. The ones that arrive disguised as nothing: a phone that rings, a letter in an ordinary envelope, a knock on a door on a Tuesday afternoon when you are doing something entirely unremarkable and have no reason to expect that the next few minutes will rearrange the furniture of your entire understanding of your own life. My knock came on a Tuesday in October. I was making coffee. The kind of ordinary domestic detail that seems, in retrospect, almost absurdly mundane given what followed, but which I remember with precise clarity because memory stores the context of significant moments alongside the moments themselves, the whole scene preserved rather than just the thing that mattered. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 27 years old, a high school English teacher in Raleigh, North Carolina, and at the time of the knock I had been living in the house on Sycamore Street for 2 years and with my boyfriend, Connor Hale, for 14 months. The coffee I was making was for the both of us. Connor was in the back room working on something, the specific and focused quiet of a man who does deep work with his hands, the fine detail woodworking he did in his off hours with the patience and precision of someone who needs the making of careful things to balance whatever else he carries. I did not know that Tuesday morning what else he carried. I thought I did. I thought I knew Connor Hale, his humor, his silences, his specific way of being in the world, the history he had offered me in pieces over 14 months of building something together. I thought I had a complete picture. Two men in uniform were about to show me the parts of the picture I had not been given. Connor before. I need to tell you about Connor before I tell you about the soldiers, because understanding what they revealed requires understanding first what I had. What we had. The specific and real and deeply felt thing that the knock interrupted. We met at a mutual friend's cookout in August of the previous year. A casual summer gathering in someone's backyard, the kind that starts in the late afternoon and goes until the fireflies come out, the kind where you end up in conversations you didn't plan with people you didn't know you needed to meet. Connor was standing at the edge of the yard when I first saw him, slightly apart from the larger group, holding a bottle of water and watching the gathering with the expression of someone who is comfortable in their own company and is choosing the edge of the party rather than being relegated to it. He was 31, 4 years older than me. Tall and quiet-moving, with the particular physical ease of someone who has spent years being very aware of their body and its relationship to space, not vanity but a kind of attentiveness, an accuracy in how he inhabited himself. He had dark hair and a way of going very still when he was listening that I noticed immediately and found, in a way I could not have articulated, deeply reassuring. We talked at the cookout for 2 hours. He was funny in the dry, understated way that requires you to be paying attention to catch it, and I was paying attention. He asked questions and listened to the answers with the quality of a person who is genuinely curious rather than performatively engaged. He told me he did renovation work, houses mostly, the structural and detailed restoration of old buildings, which he described with a quiet passion that told me immediately it was not just a job. What he did not tell me, what I would not know for a long time, was anything about the years before the renovation work. He spoke about his current life with warmth and specificity, and about his past in the edited way of someone who has decided carefully what to include and what to leave out. I noticed the editing in the distant way you notice a closed door in a house you are just beginning to learn. You see it, you register it, you do not yet know whether it leads to something important or nothing at all. I thought in the early months that it led to ordinary privacy, that some people were simply less forthcoming about their histories than others, and that this was a personality style rather than a concealment. That the closed door would open eventually in the natural course of trust building without requiring me to ask directly. Some closed doors open in their own time, some need the knock from outside to open them. What we had, Connor and I, was real. I want to be clear about that. Whatever the soldiers revealed, whatever the closed door contained, it did not retroactively make the 14 months of us into something false. The love was real. The specific daily reality of two people building a shared life, the particular texture of his presence in a room, the way he brought me coffee before I asked because he had learned my rhythms, the evenings we spent on the back porch in the summer with the neighborhood going about its quiet life around us, the conversations that started about something small and went somewhere neither of us expected, all of it was real. He was, in the ways that matter for the daily architecture of a life, the best partner I had known. Patient, genuinely kind, capable of the specific vulnerability that real intimacy requires. He could tell me when something was hard, could sit with difficulty rather than running from it, could hold space for my moods with a steadiness that I had not found in other people. He loved me in the active, attentive, daily choice way rather than the passive way, and I knew it and was grateful for it. He also had a past he had not shown me, and the soldiers came to show it. The men at the door. They were in dress uniform. This is the first thing I registered when I opened the door: the formal dark green of army dress uniforms, the brass insignia, the bearing of men who were here on official business and knew it. One was older, in his 40s perhaps, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in difficult conditions. The other was younger, mid-30s, with a carefully neutral expression that I would later understand was the specific neutrality of someone delivering news they do not know the full shape of. "Mr. Marcus Webb," the older one said. "Yes," I said. "Is Connor Hale present at this address?" Something cold moved through me, not panic, not yet, more like the first registered drop in temperature that tells you the weather is changing, the physical premonition of something approaching. "He's here," I said. "What is this about?" The younger one said, "We need to speak with Mr. Hale, and given the nature of the matter, it may be necessary for you to be present as well if he consents. There are things he may need support in discussing." I looked at them for a moment. The October afternoon was ordinary. Behind them, leaves on the street, the neighbor's dog doing something in the yard across the way, the specific unremarkable quality of a Tuesday in a residential neighborhood. And on my porch, two men in uniform with formal faces and careful words, asking for my boyfriend and suggesting that what they had to say would require support. "Wait here," I said. I went to the back room. Connor was at his workbench, sanding something, the small radio on the shelf playing something quiet. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and his expression was the ordinary one, present, mild, the face of a man in the middle of something absorbing. "There are two army officers at the front door," I said. "They're asking for you." What happened to his face in the next 3 seconds is something I will carry for a long time. It was not the face of a person surprised by unexpected visitors. It was the face of a person who has been waiting for a long time for a particular thing to arrive, and who is recognizing in the moment of its arrival that the waiting is over. The color changed, the expression changed. Something that had been carefully held in place behind his eyes shifted, not disappeared, but became visible in a way it had not been before, like a structure that has been concealed by scaffolding and is revealed when the scaffolding is removed. "Okay," he said. His voice was different, quieter, more careful. "Connor," I looked at him steadily. "What is this?" He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something that looked like the specific pain of a person who has been dreading a conversation and is now at its beginning and does not yet know how to start it. "Let me talk to them first," he said, "and then I'll tell you everything, I promise." The word everything told me that there was more than I had understood. I held that word and followed him to the front door. What they came to say. We sat in the living room, Connor on one side of me on the couch, the two officers in the chairs across, the coffee table between us with the coffee I had been making still sitting on the counter in the kitchen, unmade, forgotten. The older officer, his name was Colonel Marsh, I learned, spoke first. He spoke carefully, with the specific care of a person who has rehearsed this and who understands that the words are going to land with weight regardless of how skillfully they are chosen. Connor, it emerged, had served 8 years in the Army, 2 deployments, leaving the service 4 years ago under circumstances that were, Colonel Marsh said, the reason they were here today. He spoke about a specific incident, a mission, a decision, a series of events in which Connor had acted in a way that his commanding officers, looking at it now with the distance of 4 years and the context of a review that had been ongoing, had determined to be not only correct but exemplary. A decision that had protected the lives of several members of his unit at significant personal cost. A decision for which he had been formally recommended, in absentia, for a commendation that he had declined at the time of his discharge, and which the Army was now reissuing because the review had found that his reasons for declining, the reasons connected to his discharge, had been based on regulations that no longer existed, and judgments that the Army now formally considered to have been wrong. I was listening to all of this with the particular attention of a person assembling a picture from pieces that were arriving out of order. The commendation, the discharge, the decision, the regulations that no longer existed. My mind was working at the edges of the picture, trying to understand its shape, and I was also watching Connor, who was sitting beside me with his hands flat on his thighs and his face doing the thing it had done in the back room, the held, careful expression of a person in the presence of the thing they have been managing from a distance and which is now very close. The younger officer, Captain Reyes, spoke next, more quietly with the specific quality of someone delivering a personal rather than official message. He had served with Connor. He had been one of the men whose lives the decision had protected. He had been looking for Connor for 2 years through channels both official and personal, and when the formal review had provided the opportunity, he had requested to come along. "I wanted to tell you myself," Captain Reyes said to Connor. His voice was steady but not without feeling. "What you did, what it cost you, I've carried that for 4 years. I needed you to know that we know, that the people who were there know what kind of person you are." Connor did not speak for a moment. His jaw was tight in the specific way of a person holding something together. "Thank you," he said finally. The words came out rough. "That's thank you." I looked at Connor and I looked at the officers, and I said as gently and as directly as I could, "What did it cost him? You said there was a cost." Colonel Marsh looked at Connor. Connor looked at me, and something in his expression said, "This is the part I have been carrying, this is the door." "He was discharged," Colonel Marsh said, "under the provisions of a policy that was repealed several years ago, a policy that prohibited service members from being openly gay." He paused. Mr. Hale's discharge was connected to his identity becoming known during the events of the incident. In protecting his unit, certain things became visible that had been concealed. The army of that period used those things to discharge him rather than acknowledge what he had done. The review determined this to be unjust. The commendation is part of that correction. The room was very quiet. I understood now. The whole picture assembled from its pieces was visible: the 8 years of service, the decision that protected lives, the moment in which who he was had become known and had been used against him rather than alongside the courage that had just been demonstrated, the discharge, the years after rebuilding a life without the structure that service had provided, without the acknowledgement of what he had given and what it had cost, the renovation work, the careful making of things with his hands. The closed door in the house of our relationship, behind which all of this lived, waiting. After they left, the officers left an hour later. Colonel Marsh left paperwork, the formal commendation, documents related to the review, information about veteran services that Connor was now entitled to access given the correction of his discharge status. Captain Reyes shook Connor's hand and held it for a moment with both of his in the specific grip of a man conveying more than a handshake contains, and said something quietly that I did not hear and that I understood was not meant for me. We stood on the porch and watched the car pull away. The October afternoon was the same as it had been before they arrived: the leaves, the neighbor's dog, the ordinary residential quiet, everything unchanged, everything different. I went inside. Connor followed. We stood in the living room, not sitting, not moving toward each other, simply standing in the space where the conversation had happened, in the presence of everything that had just been said and everything that had not yet been said between us. "Connor," I said. "I know," he said, his voice was very quiet. "I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I said, and I meant it, though the saying of it was more complicated than those 5 words could fully contain. "But I need to understand, not the army part, I understand that, the us part, why you didn't tell me." He looked at the floor, he looked at the window. He looked at me with the expression I had seen in the back room, the structure revealed, the scaffolding gone, the real face of what he had been carrying visible in a way it had not been before today. "Can we sit down?" he said. We sat. The couch. The same positions as before, except the officers were gone and what was left was just us, just the two of us and everything that was between us, and the question of whether what was between us was strong enough to hold what had just been added to it. What he told me. He talked for a long time. Not fluently, it came out in pieces, in the halting and non-linear way of things that have been stored for years and are emerging for the first time into spoken language. I listened. I did not interrupt. I held the space the way you hold space for someone who is finally saying something they have been afraid to say, and I tried to keep my own reactions from interfering with the telling. He had joined the army at 22. He had wanted, he said, to be part of something larger than himself, the specific hunger of a young man who had grown up in a small town with a specific kind of father and a specific kind of expectation, who had needed a structure that would take him out of the life that had been assumed for him and put him somewhere that required something real of him. He had known he was gay before he joined. He had known it with the clear and complete certainty of someone who has understood something about themselves without ambiguity, and he had made the decision to serve anyway, under the policy that required concealment, because the need to serve was larger than the cost of the concealment. He had maintained that concealment for 8 years, maintained it with the practiced efficiency of a person who has built a life around a fundamental compartmentalization, who has learned to be fully present in one domain while keeping another domain entirely separate. I wasn't unhappy, he said. That's important to say. It wasn't a miserable 8 years. I loved the work, I loved the people, I was good at it. He paused. But I was also managing something all the time. The management was constant, it was the background noise of everything. The incident, he described it obliquely, not because he was hiding it now, but because some of it was still classified and some of it was still, 4 years later, difficult to put into words. What he could tell me was that there had been a situation requiring a rapid decision under pressure, and that he had made the decision that needed to be made, and that in the making of it certain things had been revealed, letters in his quarters, a photograph. The evidence of a private life that the policy required to be hidden. His commanding officer at the time had been a specific kind of person, the kind for whom the policy was not merely a rule but a conviction, and he had used what was found to initiate discharge proceedings rather than acknowledge the commendation that the incident clearly warranted. I could have fought it, Connor said. There were people who said I should. Captain Reyes was one of them. He was furious. He tried to advocate for me. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't want to fight it. I was tired of the management, tired of the compartmentalization. And part of me thought, if this is how it ends, at least it ends honestly. At least the version of me that goes out is the real one. He had come back to civilian life with a discharge that had been marked in a way that made certain things difficult, certain benefits unavailable, certain records incomplete, the official story of 8 years of service telling less than the whole truth. He had rebuilt slowly and carefully, with the renovation work that gave him back something of what service had given: structure, physical engagement, the satisfaction of making something that holds. He had built a life that was quiet and real and genuinely his. And then I met you, he said. He looked at me. His eyes were very direct, very open, the scaffolding completely gone now. And I wanted what we had to be completely itself, not carrying the weight of that history. I told myself I would tell you. I kept putting it off. And the longer I put it off, the harder it became to start, because then I'd have to explain not just the history but why I had waited, and the waiting would need its own explanation, and he stopped. It became a thing I was managing instead of a thing I was saying, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry you had to hear it from them instead of from me. The room was quiet. The October light had moved while we talked, the afternoon going toward evening, the quality of it changing from bright to something warmer and more amber. I looked at him for a long time. At the face I had been looking at for 14 months, now showing me something it had not shown me before, not a different person but more of the same person, the parts that had been behind the closed door now visible, the full picture finally assembled. Connor, I said, can I ask you something? Anything, he said. Were you afraid I would leave if you told me? He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said honestly, not because I thought you would, but because the history had taught me a specific lesson about what happens when who you are becomes known in a context where it shouldn't have mattered but did anyway. I knew intellectually that you were not that context, but the lesson was in my body, not my head, and bodies learn things that take longer to unlearn than heads do. I understood that. I understood it in the way that some things are understood not through analysis but through recognition, the specific recognition of someone who has their own history of learning lessons in their body that their head knows are not universally applicable. I'm not leaving, I said. He looked at me. Something in his expression was very careful, the carefulness of a person who wants to believe something and is not yet sure they are allowed to. Marcus. I'm not leaving, I said again, more clearly. I'm angry not at you, at the situation, at the 8 years of having to hide, at the people who used to you or against you instead of acknowledging what you did. I'm angry on your behalf and I'm going to be angry about it for a while. I paused. But I'm not leaving. The person I fell in love with is the same person sitting in front of me. You have more history than I knew about. That doesn't change what I know about you. It adds to it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I had not seen from him in 14 months. He put his face in his hands and he breathed once, the long shaking exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally, at last, been given permission to stop. The night and what it held. We did not resolve everything that evening. Real things do not resolve in an evening. They begin to resolve, they open into the territory of resolution, they produce the first honest conversation in a series of honest conversations that will continue for weeks and months. That is what Tuesday evening was, the opening of something, not the closing. We made dinner together. This was, I think, the right instinct to return to the ordinary, to the domestic, to the specific and grounding ritual of two people making food in a kitchen, because the ordinary is what remains when the extraordinary thing has been said and the immediate shock of it has passed, and what is left is the question of what comes next in the actual life. The ordinary is what comes next. The ordinary is what we were protecting. We talked while we cooked, not about the army, not about the disclosure, but about other things. The renovation project he was finishing. A student in my third period class who had written something extraordinary that week. Small, real things, the furniture of a shared life. The talking was different now, lighter in a way I had not anticipated, as though something that had been pressing on the air between us had been lifted, and what remained was the warmth of us without the specific weight of the unspoken. After dinner on the back porch in the October dark, he said, "I want to tell you more, not tonight, tonight is enough, but there's more I want you to know about that time, about who I was then." "I want to hear it," I said, "whenever you're ready." "It might take a while," he said, "to say it all. I haven't talked about it to anyone in 4 years." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "I have time." He reached across and took my hand, not dramatically, simply. The specific, unforced gesture of someone reaching for something they are now, at last, fully allowed to reach for. His hand was warm and certain and entirely, completely familiar, and I held it in the October night and thought about the 14 months of us and the 8 years before them and the specific cost of a life lived in compartments, and I felt the particular anger again, clean and directional, aimed at the right things, and underneath the anger the love which had not changed and was not going to change. The knock on the door had not broken us. It had broken something open, the closed door, the managed distance, the unspoken history. What came through the opening was not damage, it was truth, and the truth, as it turned out, was something we could hold. The conversations that followed. He told me more. Over the weeks that followed, evenings on the porch, mornings over coffee, a long drive we took one Saturday to nowhere in particular because he said he found it easier to say difficult things when he was looking at the road rather than at a face. He told me the rest of it. The pieces he had not said on Tuesday, the texture of the 8 years. The specific relationships of his service, the friends, the bonds of the kind that form between people in difficult conditions, the few who had known and kept his secret and the many who had not known and whose friendships had been genuine regardless. He told me about the night of the incident, not the classified parts but what it had felt like, the decision made in seconds that he would not have made differently. The specific quality of the aftermath, when what had been concealed was no longer concealed and the person who had been managing the compartmentalization for 8 years was simply visible, exposed, no longer able to be two different things in two different spaces. "It was terrifying," he said, "and also I'm not going to pretend there wasn't a part of it that was relief. The management was over. Whatever happened next, the management was over." "What happened next was unjust," I said. "Yes," he agreed, "it was. And I've spent 4 years in different relationships with that injustice, anger, then something like acceptance, then anger again when I understood what I had lost access to, then something more like, I don't know, integration maybe, understanding it as part of the story without letting it be the only part." "Does the commendation help?" I asked, "the official correction?" He thought about it. "More than I expected," he said. "I told myself it wouldn't matter, that the people who were there knew and that was enough, and that was true." But he paused. "There's something about the official acknowledgement, the record being corrected. It matters in a way I didn't let myself admit I wanted." Captain Reyes had stayed in touch, emails, occasional calls. The specific ongoing connection of people who have been through something significant together and find they want to maintain the thread of it. Connor talked about him with a warmth that was different from his usual warmth, older, more weathered, the warmth of something tested rather than something easy. I was glad for it. I was glad Connor had someone who had been there, who knew the story from the inside, who could hold parts of it that I could not hold because I had not been present for them. I am not and never will be the person who knows Connor's whole history from the inside. I came in at chapter 15 of a story that had 14 chapters before me. What I can do, what I have decided to do, consciously and repeatedly in the weeks since the knock on the door, is be the person who reads the earlier chapters with the care they deserve, who holds what he tells me with the weight it has, who does not try to minimize or resolve what happened but simply bears witness to it, which is sometimes all that love can do and which is, when done well, more than enough. What changed and what didn't? Things changed between us after the knock, and I want to be honest about how they changed, because the honest answer is complicated. Some things were harder for a while. There was a period of weeks in which I was processing something that I did not entirely have words for, not betrayal, because he had not betrayed me, but something adjacent to it, the specific disorientation of discovering that the picture you had of a person was incomplete, that you had been loving a version of someone that was real but not whole. The incomplete picture had been given to me for reasons I understood and did not blame him for, but the discovering of the incompleteness produced its own kind of grief that needed to be felt and moved through. I told him this, not accusatorially, but honestly because honest was the only mode available to us now, the only mode worth being in after what the Tuesday had cost. He listened with the quality of attention he had always had for difficult things, and he said, I know, I'm sorry for the incompleteness, I'm sorry it had a cost. It's okay, I said. You don't have to say that, he said. I know, I said, I'm not saying it to be gracious, I'm saying it because it's true, it had a cost, it's okay, both things are real. We got better at the both things are real mode of being together. The ability to hold two true things simultaneously, the cost and the okayness, the anger at the history and the love for the person, the incompleteness of before and the fullness of after, is something we developed together in the months following the knock, like a muscle that had not previously been used and was now being regularly exercised. Some things were easier. This was the surprise I had not anticipated, that the disclosure, for all its difficulty, had removed something that I had not known was there to be removed. The specific quality of distance that I had sometimes felt in Connor, not coldness, but a certain withholding, the slight remove of a person who is managing something in the background of every interaction, was gone. Not suddenly, not completely on the first day, but gradually and then increasingly, as the weeks passed and the conversations continued and the closed door remained open. He was more fully himself with me, that is the simplest way to say it. The Connor who had always been warm and present and real was now those things without the background management, without the withheld part, and the difference was not in kind but in degree, and the degree mattered enormously. It was like a room with better light. The room was the same room, but you could see it more clearly and the seeing was better. The door that opened. It is February? 4 months since the October afternoon that divided everything into before and after, and the world has continued to do what worlds do, moving forward, accumulating, producing new things alongside the old ones, making the before and after into a continuous story rather than two separate ones. Connor accepted the commendation. There was a small ceremony, small at his request, attended only by Captain Reyes and a few others who had served with him and me. I stood at the back of the room and watched them give him what he had been owed for 4 years, and I felt the anger again, clean and necessary, aimed at the right things, and I felt the pride, which was not about ownership but about witnessing. This is a person I love being seen correctly, finally, by the institution that had seen him incorrectly before. He cried, briefly and privately, in the parking lot afterward with his back to the building and his face turned toward the February sky. I stood beside him and did not try to fix it or resolve it or move him through it faster than it needed to move. I held his hand and let it be what it was, grief and relief, and something that did not have a single clean name but was real and necessary and his to feel. Okay, I said after a while. Yeah, he said. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the specific unself-conscious gesture of a man who is not performing his emotion but simply having it. Yeah, I'm okay. We went home, made dinner, sat on the back porch in the February cold, too cold really, but neither of us suggested going inside, and talked about things that had nothing to do with the army or the commendation or the Tuesday in October that had changed everything. We talked about the renovation project he was starting next month, an old Victorian in a neighborhood north of us with bones he described as extraordinary, and a history he was looking forward to uncovering. We talked about a book I had just finished that I wanted him to read. We talked about a trip we had been planning in a vague and not yet scheduled way for months, which we decided on that cold February porch to actually schedule. These are the things that remain when the significant things have been said and the grief has been felt and the anger has been acknowledged and the love has been rechosen in the full light of everything. The ordinary remains, the renovation project, the book, the trip, the porch in February that is too cold to be comfortable and which neither of us wants to leave. I think about closed doors differently now, about the reasons people keep them, not deception, not always, not usually, often protection. The specific, understandable, sometimes wrong-headed protection of a person who has learned that certain truths produce certain costs, and who has decided that the people they love should be shielded from those costs, or that the relationship should be shielded from the weight of them. The logic of the closed door is not always fear of the other person. Sometimes it is care for them, misguided care perhaps, care that costs more in the long run than the openness would have, but care. Connor closed the door to protect us and to protect himself, and because bodies learn lessons that take longer to unlearn than heads do. And two men in dress uniform arrived on an October Tuesday and opened it, because some doors in the end are opened by the outside raw.
Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Prism Heart Chronicles. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos.